Welcome! Today we're diving into a story that literally defies all odds. In this explainer, we're going to see how the absolute ultimate symbol of modern wealth, luxury, and engineering perfection was actually born from a place of absolute grinding poverty. It's an incredibly fascinating journey of survival, and I am so excited to share it with you. All right, let's just jump right into this massive contrast. On one hand, you've got the dream, right? Rolls Royce. It's the pinnacle of luxury cars. For the wealthiest people on the planet, owning one is the ultimate status symbol. But the reality of where this brand started, wildly different. The founder, Henry Royce, definitely did not grow up with a silver spoon. Actually, he spent his entire childhood doing grueling child labor just to survive extreme poverty. It's such a stark difference that it makes what he eventually built seem almost impossible.
So, part 1. From poverty to engineering, the making of a perfectionist.
Let's take a look at his early timeline. Born in a tiny English village back in 1863, his life was completely upended at just 4 years old when his dad's business collapsed. They literally ended up on the streets. By the time Henry was 9, his father passed away. So this kid had to start delivering newspapers while his mom worked as a maid. But watch what happens right here at age 14. An aunt saw some spark in him and managed to get him an apprenticeship at the Great Northern Railway Company. From there, Henry just worked day and night. He devoured books, learned carpentry, math, and crucially, electronics. By 17, he was a fully capable mechanic, and by 21, he was a professional engineer at a place called Maxim Western. He literally educated himself right out of poverty. Incredible, right?
Now, eventually Maxim Western hit financial ruin. But Royce didn't just go, look for another regular job. Instead, armed with just his 20-pound life savings, which wasn't much even back then, he launched his own electrical engineering company in Manchester. At first, he was just doing whatever it took to keep the lights on, repairing sewing machines, fixing up electrical fittings, but he was sharp. He noticed this huge rising demand for electric doorbells and light bulb holders. So he pivoted. He started manufacturing those instead, and it paid off big time. By 1900, that tiny 20-pound investment had exploded into a company pulling in 20,000 pounds in sales.
Moving on to part 2, building a better car. A doctor's orders spark an automotive revolution. So jump to 1901. Cheaper German and American electronics are flooding the market, and it absolutely crushes Royce's business. The stress from this was so overwhelming that his physical and mental health just collapsed. His doctor actually gave him a really simple prescription: get some fresh air, travel around, but absolutely no physical strain. So to do this, Royce buys a French-made car called the Decaville. But here's the thing, for an obsessive perfectionist like Royce, this car was a total nightmare. It was noisy, the brakes were terrible, and it was constantly overheating. He literally couldn't stand it. So he didn't just, tweak a few things, he completely redesigned the entire machine to be quiet, light, durable, and highly reliable. And honestly, fixing up this disaster of a car is what gave him the confidence to try and build one entirely from scratch. He pulled a team together, set up a workshop, and made it happen. On April 1st, 1904, Royce's very own 10-horsepower, 2-cylinder car perfectly completed a 50-kilometer road test. Not a single issue. It was so much better than anything else out there at the time. He proved he had the engineering genius to build these world-class, ultra-reliable cars. But there was one massive problem. He was an engineer. He wasn't a salesman. He had absolutely no idea how to actually get these cars out to the world.
Which brings us to part 3, the legendary partnership. Engineering meets marketing genius.
Enter Charles Rolls. He was a passionate motorist who already had a really successful business selling high-quality cars, and he was desperately looking for a luxury British car maker to partner with. When he finally saw Royce's cars at an exhibition, he literally told his business partner that he had just found the greatest engineer in the world. And what's truly mind-blowing is how fast their new joint venture, Rolls-Royce Limited, took over the market after launching in March 1906. Rolls was a marketing genius. He knew the best way to prove a car's worth back then was through high-stakes racing. So they entered their 10, 15, 20, and 30 horsepower models into the Isle of Man and Tourist Trophy races. And they didn't just win, they absolutely smashed existing speed records. Just like that, the brand's elite pedigree was set.
But their true masterstroke, the real game changer, dropped at the end of 1906, the Silver Ghost. This wasn't just a car, it was a total engineering marvel. It packed 40 to 50 horsepower with a 6-cylinder engine, painted in this gorgeous, striking silver. And it earned its name because the engine ran so incredibly silently and the ride was so smooth, people said it was literally like a ghost gliding down the street. Of course, to prove just how exceptional this vehicle really was, Charles Rolls came up with a staggering marketing stunt, a 24,000-kilometer endurance test. To put that into perspective, they drove the Silver Ghost continuously, day and night, for 2.5 months, and it passed flawlessly. Zero mechanical breakdowns. Back in the early 1900s, that level of reliability was basically unheard of.
And their marketing brilliance went even further with something called the whisper test. This is legendary. They would literally take a coin, balance it on its edge right on the bonnet of the running car, and then just drive. The engine was so unbelievably refined and the ride so smooth that the coin wouldn't drop. Because of brilliant, undeniable demonstrations like this, the Silver Ghost instantly became the absolute favorite of kings, queens, and the world's top industry leaders.
Part 4. Tragedy and Pivot. Facing the Abyss of Loss and War.
Right at the peak of their success, things took a really dark turn. See, Charles Rolls was also a huge aviation enthusiast. Tragically, on July 12, 1910, the tail section of his Wright Flyer snapped in midair. He crashed from 100 feet up and died at just 32 years old. The company was completely devastated. Then, just a year later, in 1911, Henry Royce gets diagnosed with severe bowel cancer. Even after major surgery, the doctors gave him a maximum of 3 months to live. And if losing their founders wasn't terrifying enough, 1914 hits. World War I breaks out, completely crashing the global economy and instantly wiping out the luxury car market.
But here is where Royce's sheer willpower kicks in. Defying basically all medical odds, he makes a miraculous 100% recovery from cancer. And instead of, retiring to rest, he used that borrowed time to push the company even harder. He vastly improved the Silver Ghost, beefed up the chassis, increased the ground clearance, upgraded the suspension. He also noticed this trend where customers were putting these really tacky personal mascots on the hoods of their cars, which he felt totally ruined the brand's elegant image. So he commissioned the now iconic Spirit of Ecstasy mascot. It was modeled after an actress named Eleanor Thornton, meant to symbolize grace, freedom, and speed. Thanks to these relentless obsessive improvements, profits soared to over £90,000 by 1913.
This leads us to Part 5, Surviving War with Aviation, how Rolls-Royce powered the military.
When the war started, everyone thought luxury brands were done for, but Royce met with military authorities who were desperate for high-performance, super reliable vehicles. So what do? They take the incredibly durable Silver Ghost and they modify it. They transform these luxury cars into heavily armored vehicles, slapping on 8mm thick armor and revolving machine gun turrets. And they turned out to be incredibly effective in the harsh desert environments of the Middle East. At the same time, they also converted the Silver Ghost into war ambulances. Because the ride was just so flawlessly smooth, it was absolutely perfect for transporting wounded soldiers without jostling them and causing more pain. Fitted with electric lighting for night missions, these Rolls-Royce ambulances ended up saving thousands of lives. But he didn't stop at cars. Working with the military, Royce realized Britain was dangerously reliant on French companies for airplane engines. So this self-taught engineer decides to just teach himself aero engine design. And he scales up incredibly fast. By 1915, he launches the Eagle, an engine so reliable and fuel-efficient that the military immediately orders 500 of them. He follows that right up in late 1915 with the Hawk for light aircraft. Then comes the Falcon in 1916, and finally, this massive engine called the Condor in 1918, built specifically for long-range bombers. Royce's brilliant pivot gave Britain a massive aerial advantage in combat and spying missions. It was absolutely crucial to the war effort.
Part 6. An Enduring Luxury Legacy. The Final Years and Immortal Perfection.
So the war ends, and heading into the 1920s, Rolls-Royce is facing fierce new competition from brands like Cadillac. Royce knew they needed something bold to defend their crown. In 1925, they finally retired the legendary Silver Ghost and launched the Phantom. It was an absolute masterpiece, featuring next-level performance and four-wheel brakes. It totally reclaimed the luxury top spot. In fact, by 1931, Rolls-Royce had grown so powerful that they actually bought out their bankrupt rival, Bentley. Royce immediately got to work designing the Bentley 3.5-liter, a brilliant car that perfectly blended the DNA of both of these legendary companies.
But sadly, this is where the story of our self-taught perfectionist comes to a close. On April 22, 1933, at the age of 70, Sir Henry Royce took his last breath. He passed away just a few months before his final creation, the Bentley 3.5-liter, even rolled off the production line. He was quite literally working, designing, and improving right up until his very last days. Now, the company he left behind definitely hit some very turbulent times later on. Like in the 1960s, there were severe financial difficulties that actually forced the business to completely separate its aviation and automobile divisions. Yet even after navigating all those rough waters and eventually being acquired by BMW Motors in the modern era, the Rolls Royce name hasn't lost even a single ounce of its prestige. It is still the absolute peak, the greatest global symbol of ultimate luxury.
As the saying goes, owning a Rolls Royce is like owning a masterpiece, which symbolizes the perfection and charisma of Rolls. And honestly, that masterpiece status endures today for one very specific reason: the relentless, uncompromising, perfectionist spirit of a boy who started out with absolutely nothing but a desperate drive to survive.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to mull over. Does true immortal perfection always require being forged in the fires of extreme adversity? Think about it. Would Henry Royce have gone on to build the absolute greatest cars in the world if he hadn't first been forced to claw his way out of the darkest poverty? It's a pretty fascinating thing to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I'll catch you next time.